Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nessie's Dead. We are your hosts, Spencer and Helen.
Hello.
Hello. So, we have been pretty paranormal heavy the past few weeks. Even you did paranormal, which is not your usual.
We're alien crazy over here lately.
I know. That was completely unintentional, too. It was just a lot of alien episodes for some reason.
It really was.
But you suggested to me that I should do a true crime episode, and I listened. So This week I will be taking us back into true crime. It's been quite a while for me. I mean, I touch onto true crime in our Internet Urban Legends episode.
Yeah, just a little bit you did.
Yeah, but other than that, I haven't really gone full throttle into a true crime case for quite a while.
Mm-hmm. You've been leaving it up to me.
Yes. But this week, I will be borrowing your true crime crown. It's not just true crime. It's also a little bit of kind of weird and dark history.
Okay.
For this episode, it's not just one case so much that we're going to focus on. It all kind of centers around a particular place. But more specifically, it all centers around a specific person. And that person is actually a nun.
I have no idea. Is it the nun from The Conjuring?
No. Okay. I think people might compare her to that.
Oh.
So this nun that we're going to be talking about ends up turning this place of worship and healing into a torture chamber. But first, before we take the plunge into this story, I want to first give a little bit of a piece of background information that ends up being the catalyst for the story. Now, from 46 BC to 1582, pretty much the whole world operated on the Julian calendar, which is now referred to as the Old Calendar. But the Julian calendar, it came about through Julius Caesar. But even though it was based on the solar year, it ended up coming, after several centuries, it ends up having a bunch of issues. It kind of confused me. I'm not super well-versed on the whole thing with, the calendar. They were coming up to a lot of issues, specifically with dates not falling correctly, with the solstices and the equinoxes, and more specifically with Easter and other Christian holidays. So in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII establishes the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that we have since been using. However, there is a sect of people who prefer the old calendar, the Julian calendar. So I know you might be wondering, how on earth does discussing the calendar have anything to do with true crime? Well,
yeah, I was.
Let's go ahead and take the plunge into this, and it'll all make a little more sense.
Okay, I'm ready to plunge.
We will be talking about the evil nun, Mariam Soulakiotis.
I've never heard of her.
So she was also referred to as Mother Rasputin, and at the time that this case broke in the media, she was being referred to as the most evil woman in the world.
I don't know why I didn't hear of this before.
I know. I learned about it about a month or so ago, and I was like, wow, how is this not more talked about with true crime and weird history?
Yeah.
I also feel like perhaps Ryan Murphy could have used this maybe as inspiration to American Horror Story Asylum, because in that it is run, the asylum, I think, is also ran by an evil nun who kind of uses the asylum and her faith as a disguise, essentially.
Oh, that makes sense.
And that's kind of what we have here. So let's go ahead and get a little bit into Mariam's backstory.
Okay.
So there is very little known about her from before she goes into being a nun, very little. But it is believed she was born in 1883. There is no official documentation of her birth, but 1883 is the most agreed upon year, so that's what we're going to go with. She was born in Karatia, Greece, which is not terribly far from Athens, And at the time of birth, she was given the name Marina. Now, it is unclear as to why she ends up going by Mariam, and we also don't know when she starts going by Mariam, but Mariam is officially what she's referred to as, so that's what we will continue to call her. But she grew up in a poor farming family. Of course, she grows up working on the farm. Now, there were some reports that said she worked on her family farm, but she also went and worked on other farms. I couldn't find anything that confirmed all of the farm work and whatnot, but after farm work, she does go on to work at a factory. We don't know what kind of factory. We don't know what she was doing at the factory, but she worked at a factory.
Okay.
That's kind of all we know about her and her backstory. We do know that she was an old calendarist, which is somebody who believes in the old calendar, the Julian calendar, and they do not adopt the Gregorian calendar that the rest of the world is living by. So she is an old calendarist, and somehow, we don't know how, somehow she gets connected with Matthew Carpothecus. He was a priest or a monk. He had recently been excommunicated from the Greek Orthodox Church because he also was an old calendarist.
Oh,
And
they didn't like that much?
no, yeah, like you could not, like that was really not okay. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Gregorian calendar was proposed by a pope. And I feel like the Catholic Church probably did not like the idea of somebody rejecting the pope's idea, regardless of if it's a present pope or a past pope.
Yeah.
It's like the pope is law. You know, he's the highest authority on earth,
That makes
according
sense.
to the church.
Yeah.
So I feel like that has a big part of it. But he does get excommunicated, gets in touch with Mariam, and the two hit it off right away. Now, there are some reports that suggest that they got in contact with one another because Mariam was a nun and he was a priest. Others suggest that she was not yet a nun, but she became a nun after meeting him. Some reports suggest that they had a romantic relationship.
Oh, I thought that's no.
It is no. However, I wouldn't be too shocked considering the fact that this nun goes on to do a whole lot of no in her life. But either way, they're both old calendarists and they connect and they get close. They decide to open their own monastery. At the time, there were actually a lot of old calendarists in Greece. There were actually 800 old calendarist churches that came up at this time all around Greece. Mariam and Matthew decided, like, hey, let's jump on this. So in 1927, they opened the monastery or convent of the Virgin of the Pines. That is a rough translation. I do not speak Greek, so that is an English translation of the name of the convent or monastery, but it's in reference to the Virgin Mary, and it's in reference to the fact that they're kind of in a piney area up on a mountain, kind of on the outskirts of the town that Mariam was from, Karatea.
Gotcha.
So right away, Matthew becomes the archbishop, which is like a higher bishop in the church, but he was not officially considered an archbishop in the eyes of the mainstream church. He was only considered an archbishop for Old Calendarist Church. There was like a lot of division between the new and old calendarism.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But because he was the archbishop, he was the one who was essentially in charge. Like, he was the head figure, but Mariam was right there by his side the whole time. And she's pretty dominating. She ends up really being the one to run the whole show. She was actually the one to secure 7 acres of land that the monastery ends up being built on, which is very weird because she did not have the money. He did not have the money. And it's a total mystery. We have no idea how she was able to do that.
That's interesting. I wonder how.
I have no clue. I mean, I have a slight idea. We can talk about it once we get into some more shady stuff she starts doing.
Okay.
But this is when everything starts to get kind of weird with her. Right away, Mariam is given the title of abbess, which is the head nun, because nuns live at the abbey. And then the one who's in charge is the abbess. So she is now referred to as Mother Mariam. All of the other nuns at the monastery follow and report to her. She's in charge. She's Madam President of the nuns.
She's the main bitch.
She is. But again, Archbishop Matthew is still technically in charge and had the final say. However, he was not very present once the monastery was open. He spent a lot of his time in isolation in his room doing penance, which is a form of self-punishment to repent for sin.
Yeah, I wonder why, because he was banging Mariam. It's true.
You think he was?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, what other kind of sin is he getting into up there?
I don't know.
See? Exactly. He knows what he did.
But he would isolate in his room and just do prayer all day. He would also fast for up to 40 days, and he would adorn his body in heavy metal chains.
He had some issues.
Yeah, he's not really out on the floor of the monastery engaging or doing anything. So all of it's really being run by Mariam. By the 1940s, Matthew has a stroke and ends up being paralyzed and bedridden. When this happens, he's even more out of the show. Also at this time, another archbishop comes to see him to discuss ending the division within the church between people who follow the Gregorian calendar and the old calendarists. This guy was like, hey, I think we should maybe try to come to some form of compromise. Matthew was pretty open to it, but during the discussion, Mariam, with a bunch of nuns, burst in and was like, no, you cannot tell us what to do. You need to leave right now. And she got rid of him.
They're really serious about this calendar business.
They are. I feel like it ends up becoming a cult. Now, I did not see anyone else talking about this case in terms of cult themes, but I do think it kind of gives cult vibes. Not quite yet, but we'll get into it with how the nuns operate and how some of the people who end up coming to the monastery operate, what they are kind of convinced of.
Okay.
Because of Mariam. So after Matthew's stroke and everything, she ends up really taking charge, and she ends up turning this place of faith and hope into a hellish nightmare. This is when she starts using the monastery as a tuberculosis treatment center. These were pretty common at the time. Tuberculosis was quite an issue. There was no cure. There was really no good treatment for it. So a lot of these tuberculosis centers are popping up. She kind of jumps on that bandwagon. She advertises it as a place of healing that's based in faith. And they were up on that mountain. So I guess higher elevation is good for people with tuberculosis.
Yeah,
so
they thought that like sunshine and fresh air would help cure it. Or at least make the symptoms not as bad.
Yeah. Well, along with that, you also need a doctor, which Mariam was not, and she did not have any present. So she's advertising like, oh, come, we have the high elevation, we're out in nature, it's the right place to be. Yet people with tuberculosis come, and then they just die there. And they die in really painful ways because there's no doctor, there are no nurses, they're not being treated at all. And the only instance of any doctor ever being allowed inside the monastery was to sign a death certificate.
Oh, are these people not even allowed to leave then?
No, they weren't.
Wow.
I mean, I don't think they physically could.
Yeah.
But there are other people who were not allowed to leave. And that's kind of why I mentioned I think it kind of gives cult vibes.
Oh, man, that's awful. Just think you go there thinking you're going to get help, and then you're like, wait, where's the doctor? None.
I know. Well, and while all this is happening, so you're there, you're sick, there's no doctor, you're not getting taken care of, you're being neglected, you're not being fed. She was very abusive to the patients. And then she was also brainwashing them, convincing them that she needed to have them to sign all of their money and property over to her.
Oh, wow. Ponzi scheming them.
Yes. There was this one particular woman who was suffering from tuberculosis, and she decides to head up and get treatment. When she arrives, she is taken in and expecting to be taken care of, but instead they throw her into a cage and keep her locked in it. And they don't feed her. They give her like scraps, so she's starving to death. And obviously, there's no treatment, total medical negligence. She eventually died. She actually died pretty quickly. And she would have died anyway because of the tuberculosis. But being locked up in a cage and not fed really sped up the disease and caused her to die much quicker and in a much more harsh way than she probably should have.
In a cage?
Yeah. This is a nun, remember. We're at a monastery, and this is a nun orchestrating all of this.
That's torturous.
Now, when this woman died, doctors did come in to sign the death certificate, and this was when some doctors started to go public talking about how anytime they came to this monastery, they noticed that they were not being asked to treat anyone. There were no other doctors there, and they only signed the death certificate, which I'm assuming they signed it pretty often, considering the abuse that happens here.
Mm-hmm.
But even though they went public talking about this, they never reported anything to the police. And I guess no one in town really thought that it was that odd when the doctors made note of this.
You would think they would, though.
Right? Especially if all the other tuberculosis centers had doctors and this one didn't. They were just signing death certificate after death certificate.
I think it would make people discouraged from going there.
It had quite the opposite effect, actually. Mariam also was scouting fellow old calendarists to join the monastery, offering a place for like-minded individuals to find peace together. This is on top of the tuberculosis people. So she's got all them suffering, and now she's bringing in people to just kind of join the monastery.
What's the point, though, of having that many people up there? Well, I get with the tuberculosis people, she is taking their estates and everything.
Yes, but the people that she's scouting to join her monastery, she was going after everyone. But specifically, she was looking at older, widowed, wealthy women.
Oh, I think I see where this is going.
Yeah. So she's going after a more vulnerable woman. She's alone at home, and she has money. And is already an old calendarist. Mariam would convince this woman, and it wasn't just that older widowed woman, but she would convince them to join the monastery. Now, when this happened, the first thing that you do is you get separated from whoever you're with if you come in a group or with another person. You would then be taken to these prayer rooms where you would be forced to just sit and pray. Sometimes this would occur for 15 hours.
I can't imagine doing that.
No, I couldn't imagine. I had a hard time doing it for a minute solid in Catholic school as a kid. 15 hours?
No. That's insanity.
So then from there, they would be taken to cells and cages where they'd be locked in, and they were usually in the basement of the building, and they would be forced to fast for up to 40 days.
When they die?
That's what I was kind of confused about. I think some of them got scraps, but also if you're fasting, if you're being forced into a fast, that's starvation. Especially if you're locked in a prison cell or a cage in a basement.
Wow.
They would also be forced into sleep deprivation. This was usually enforced by some type of guard. They probably had to stand in place or walk in place like all night or something. Also, while in the monastery, they would have these vows of silence, which is a common practice for nuns to do in a monastery. But Mariam was very, very strict about it. During a vow of silence, nobody speaks. It's absolute silence. If somebody spoke, Mariam would then proceed to beat them. But it wasn't just a slap or a quick hit. She would take them and hang them upside down and beat them aggressively with her shoe for hours.
Wouldn't she get tired of doing that? Hours?
So once she was done with it, she would walk off, and her nuns would then come and continue the beating.
This place sounds like hell.
I know. I think that would kill you. Hanging upside down for hours, getting ruthlessly beaten with shoes.
Oh, I didn't even think about the upside down because all the blood's rushing to your head. Because I feel like you can die from that. Because wasn't there a roller coaster and like a lot of people died because it got stuck hanging upside down?
I don't know. I would believe it.
So.
Because we're not supposed to really be upside down.
No.
So she was doing all this to really break these people down physically and mentally, and this would leave them totally vulnerable so that she could really mold them like clay for her brainwashing. And this is how she would get them to then sign over everything to her. She would convince these victims that this was all the Lord's work, they deserved this punishment and suffering, that signing all their assets over to her would give them eternal salvation.
Oh, so they were just mentally unstable by this point.
Yes, I mean,
torture.
No food.
Yeah.
Yeah, no food, no sleep. You're terrified of this woman and her little nuns. It was easy to take advantage of them.
That makes a lot more sense.
And there were a lot of people, after they signed everything away, she would then let them free.
Oh.
Not always, but a lot of them did, but they never came forward.
Maybe they were too scared to come forward.
I think they were just really brainwashed.
Maybe that too. I'd be terrified they'd come get me in the middle of the night and take me back.
That too. She would also convince them to confess their sins to her. I think she did this usually during beatings, but then she would use this as blackmail and would spread their secrets, their deep, dark, sinful secrets around town if they did not do what she said and if they did not sign assets to her.
Oh, man. She's just blackmailing people, beating the money out of them?
Yeah. She's just using the fact that she's a nun to really get away with it.
Yeah, exactly.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about Mr. and Mrs. Baca. So Mr. and Mrs. Baca were old calendarists, just like Mariam. They were actually followers of Archbishop Matthew. They had 2 children, and they all decide to join the monastery. So Mr. and Mrs. Baca and their 2 kids, they join, and right away they sign all of their assets over to Mariam. Like right away. Right when they do that, they are separated, which I can only imagine for the children is really terrifying. But they're all separated from each other. I know for sure Mrs. Baca was stripped and forced to wear a burlap sack. I think that was the attire given to all of the victims and captives.
Oh, I wonder how she got people that came to like sign up or join to actually do so, because I can only imagine if you're looking around this place, you could probably get an idea real quick of the torture and violence and mistreatment.
I think a lot of it was kind of kept hidden. Like a lot of the victims were kept in the basement. But there were a lot of people who did notice things happening and they just never came forward, at least not at first.
People that were staying there or people that came to like sign up?
People nearby.
Oh, okay.
But specifically with Mrs. Baca, after she signs everything away, she starts to see that everything's kind of weird, and she starts to put 2 and 2 together and seeing, I don't know, maybe she started to figure out that she was being put into some torture center in the basement, and she tries to escape. So
I would have gunned right out of there in my burlap sack.
Yes.
Barefoot.
Well, that's exactly what she tried doing, but she was caught. She was thrown in a prison cell. She was actually thrown in a prison cell in the basement that the tuberculosis patients were kept in to die.
Oh, so she's going to get that at least.
So once she's in this prison cell with the dying tuberculosis patients, she's screaming out for help. I think there might have been a window in the little cell she was in, but they're in this isolated area. Nobody comes to help her. And she ends up dying in this prison cell not long after. And the same thing happened to her husband. We do not know what happened to her children. I don't know if they survived or not. I'm sure they also went through torture.
Yeah.
But what's really odd is She was screaming, and no one came to help, and I'm sure she assumed nobody heard her. But people did. So even though it was a pretty remote area up on this mountain on the outskirts of a town, there were some people who lived nearby. They will end up coming forward claiming that they would hear screams and crying and moans every day and every night.
Oh, I'm sure.
But they never reported it.
Maybe they thought the people were praying. I don't know. That's weird that nobody reported anything.
I know. There was also a man that ends up coming forward claiming to have seen a very frail, sick-looking older woman near the monastery riding around on a bike, and she was wearing chains. He was like, okay, that doesn't look normal. So he approached her and asked if she needed help. She was like, no, I'm repenting for my sins.
Oh, no.
He did not report that until after this case breaks.
Yeah, maybe he kind of thought that was just what they...
Yeah.
He probably was like, she must have some pretty heavy sins.
Yeah. I can understand him thinking, okay, maybe she chose to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but the people who heard the screams, that to me is a little more like, okay, come on.
Yeah, especially if they are screaming for help and things like that. I'm sure like all the beatings, those probably weren't very nice screams. Those probably sounded terrifying to hear.
Yeah, or they were crying out for help as they were dying from starvation in a cage.
Ugh.
But this happened to a lot of people. A lot of people who kind of I don't want to say voluntarily, but people who were not yet being tortured by Mariam that had signed their assets over to her and then ended up in this scary situation. But through all of this, she ends up obtaining 300 homes, farms, and properties all around Greece.
She practically owns Greece at this point.
I know. Alongside that, she also had claimed a whole bunch of gold and jewelry from these people.
I don't understand what she's going to even do with that since she's so preoccupied being the nun on top of this mountain beating people.
I know. And it's weird because the nunhood is very not materialistic.
Yeah.
And I mean, either way, she's not really a real or good nun anyway. But
it's not like she's going to spend that money on nice clothing or...
No. Oh, I mean, she's got a bunch of jewelry now.
Oh, that's true. But
I don't know.
I don't really feel like they go around boasting and wearing all that, though.
No, like, not at all. And I wonder if maybe at night or something she would leave the convent and take the nun garb off and go...
out and about.
Yeah, and, like, put on the jewels. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there, but...
Or just wear them in her room and appreciate them.
Yeah, or maybe do nothing with them. It was just... You know, kind of like serial killers sometimes collect
items.
Trophies. Yeah, so maybe that was kind of similar for her, collecting property and jewelry.
Perhaps.
Because she is considered a serial killer.
I mean, yeah.
But also, what's interesting is at this time she was not just taking property and abusing and torturing and killing people. She was also smuggling olive oil, spices, and tires.
This is very odd, the tire situation.
I know the olive oil, I'm like, okay, they're in Greece.
Yeah.
Spices, I'm like,
yeah, I can get with that.
Not that I'm like, cool, smuggle on, but those are things that make sense.
Uh-huh. Tires is throwing me off there.
I don't know how she got involved in any of that, but she was doing that. And fun fact, that actually ends up being what brings her down.
The tire smuggles?
Yes. It was not.
Not the beatings or the murders or the starvations or the fake clinic. It's the tire smuggling.
Yeah. Officially, that was what it was, yeah.
Oh, I'm curious. I'm waiting for this.
So while Mariam murdered and tortured and manipulated innocent people, pretty much all of the nuns stood by and obeyed her. Which, again, that kind of reminds me of what... It's just very cult-like.
Mm-hmm.
But she is the head nun, and a lot of the nuns, I think, really believed that what she was doing was correct. We will get into that again a little bit later, but some do suggest that the nuns were just terrified of her, and that's why they all obliged. But
I mean, yeah, they're probably seeing what's going on with everybody else, and then they fear that if they don't comply, then they're going to be in a cage, getting
yeah,
beaten and tortured. It's all fear-based.
well, one nun, Sister Maria, had just about enough, and she ends up speaking out against the brutal conditions and manipulation and the murder. This then leads Mariam to instruct the other nuns to beat her. So the other nuns oblige, and they beat her so badly that she ended up being taken to the hospital. I don't know why Mariam allowed that. It's very odd that she was like, okay, you can go to the hospital now,
Yeah.
when everyone else was being chained and tied up.
And to just die.
Yes. But maybe because she was a fellow nun. I don't know. But for whatever reason, she is sent to the hospital. She was so badly beaten that her face was like destroyed and unrecognizable.
Oh.
And her internal organs had pretty much all failed, and she ended up dying in the hospital. But the doctors and nurses never reported it.
What?
I don't know if the nuns had a story like, oh, she fell down the stairs.
Down the...
I don't know. But they never reported it to authorities.
That doesn't make any sense.
I know. It gets a little weirder with the authorities.
Okay.
We do have one more nun that speaks out against her, and that was Sister Theodote. Now, when she spoke out, the nuns were instructed to beat her, and they do. But they beat her so badly that she died right there on the spot. So years go by, and the torture and the manipulation continues. Mariam just keeps getting away with it, and it just doesn't get reported. That is until 1948. So Eugenia Margetta came forward stating that she had been imprisoned and tortured at the monastery, all by Mariam. The only reason that she was able to be set free was because she agreed to sign all of her assets over to her. She reports this to the police. They do nothing. They completely ignore the report.
That's ridiculous.
I know. And then, also in 1948, a woman comes forward notifying police that her mother had suddenly signed over everything to Mariam, like out of the blue.
Oh.
And this woman was like very adamant that her mother would not have done that unless she was coerced. She files this with the police, and yet again, they ignore it.
That's great work there.
Now, I don't know if maybe the police ignored all this because they didn't believe it, thinking it's a nun. Like, okay, it's a nun, guys. Because nuns are supposed to be like really good people. That's my best guess as to why they would ignore it. Like, it doesn't make sense really to me.
Yeah. Or they thought these
Especially-
people were just lying because, like, if you do think about it, you don't think of a convent of nuns as torturing and stealing people's money and property.
No.
It probably just didn't make any sense to the police why that convent would be doing that.
Yeah, well, especially in the 40s.
Yeah, that too. It's a time period as well.
But they kept just ignoring it until 1949 when the FBI actually gets involved.
Oh.
Now, they get involved because a Greek-American man reports his daughter, 18-year-old Simela Spiridis, as missing. And her last known whereabouts were in Greece. She ends up being traced back to Mariam's monastery. This is when the FBI reaches out to the Greek government and finally is able to convince them to look into Mariam. So authorities end up talking with locals that lived kind of in the area, and this was when they learned about the people, like the constant screaming. They learned about the people being seen in chains. They also learned that Mariam was taking part of the illegal exportation of olive oil, spices, and tires.
Those car tires.
Yeah, car tires.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they didn't have any official reason necessarily to go into the monastery, I guess. They used the exportation of oil and tires as their little inn to go after her for that specifically.
That is so odd. Exporting tires from
I know.
a bunch of nuns. I can just picture these nuns wheeling these tires down the road.
Yeah. In between torture and fraud, they're collecting tires and buckets of olive oil.
It sounds like some backwoods shit.
I know. It is. It is
Yeah.
kind of it's just up on this mountain
Yeah.
in the pines.
It's weird.
But so that woman that went missing, Samela, she went missing in 1949. The raid of the monastery did not take place until 1950.
A whole year.
So, yes. Now, there's some reports that said they did end up finding her. Some reports say otherwise. It seems like she more likely was not recovered.
Oh.
I'm not entirely sure, but from the research, that's kind of what I gathered. On December 4th, 1950, 85 police officers, a prosecutor, a judge, and a coroner all raided the monastery in an operation that lasted through the night. Inside, they find sick and dying torture victims, including over 30 children whose growth had been stunted. They were all taken to the hospital for treatments and then ended up being sent to orphanages, which is also a sad fate for them.
Yeah.
Now, when they were taking the children away, the nuns would not let go of them. And they had to fight the nuns off and pull the children out of their grasp.
I don't understand why they would be fighting to hold on to them. I mean, they're not caring for them in any way.
I don't know. I don't know.
That doesn't make any sense.
I know. That part was kind of odd. Unless they were trying to make it look like, oh, we're protecting them.
Maybe, but I'm pretty sure they could see that they were not in
The cops figured it
the
out.
best condition.
Yeah. So along with those children, they also found a bunch of naked, emaciated, elderly women. I guess they were almost naked, but a lot of them were chained up in the basement. There was one actually in a 4x7 cage.
Ugh.
So that's
It
pretty
sounds
small.
like such a horrific scene to show up to, and I bet they had no preparation for any of this.
No. A relatively small town in Greece in the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bet
Not
they were just like,
expecting a torture chamber.
what?
So we never officially know exactly the torture methods that they did, other than sleep deprivation and starvation and the prison cells and cages. But the judge referred to it as medieval torture.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure we don't have too many accounts unless those nuns are singing.
Yeah, and
everybody's probably dead that went through it.
For the most part.
I mean, I'm sure the other people are just so out of it by that point from the starvation and...
Well, and the brainwashing.
Yeah.
I mean, the judge that was on the trial, he said that if people saw the case file and all the stuff that was happening in it and whatnot, that they would never recover.
Oh,
So
wow.
I guess it was really, really horrific. I couldn't really find too much more on it, for the gruesome details, but alongside all of the captive victims, they also found a whole lot of cash and the remains of 100 people.
Oh my God. Were they just piled up? Do we know how they were found, or did
we don't.
Oh.
They didn't disclose that much. There's actually not a whole lot on this case, which is so just crazy. It is crazy to me.
Yeah.
Because this is a crazy story.
I would think we'd have some kind of account of, if they're just stacked up somewhere or at least buried.
I'm sure a lot did end up getting buried, so I think there are probably way more that don't get recorded.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense.
Now, at first they had a hard time pressing charges on her outside of the smuggling, and I don't know why. I guess a lot of it is because the victims were so brainwashed that they believed that this was a good thing that happened to them. They didn't want to press charges against Mariam. And they were like, no, we're repenting, like that one lady on the bike. So they had to come for her for the smuggling oil, spices, and tires instead of murder and torture.
It's so weird.
I know. For the illegal exportation, she gets 25 months in jail.
That's
it. But then the case runs in the media. And all of a sudden, everyone is talking about it in Greece. All of a sudden, now that it's being discussed, more victims start coming forward. More people start coming forward, like the people in the town talking about hearing the screams and whatnot. Like all of a sudden, stuff starts happening and coming out about what was really going on.
Yeah.
Now, this leads to another trial in 1953, and Mariam is finally charged with abuse, forging wills, negligent homicide, and officially 3 murders.
Good.
So the 3 murders were of the 2 nuns and a monk. I don't know anything about the monk that she murdered, but that was in it. She officially, even though she was only found guilty for 3 murders, and with the negligent homicide and the fraud and whatnot, she was considered officially guilty of the deaths of 7 people. But the police said that even though they cannot arrest her for it, like they didn't have solid proof on it or whatever, she was directly responsible for at least 27 murders.
A lot more, I think.
Yeah, the deaths of over 170 people were on her hands. Officially, but that they couldn't, like they didn't have anything to go on with those 170, and that's just like what they had to go on.
Yeah, I'm sure it was way more.
I'm sure. So for the murder, she was given 10 years in prison.
That's it?
I know, that's it. But she does end up getting 4 more years added because she gets tried again for something else, like a loophole within it or something. So she ends up getting only a total of 16 years and 1 month.
That's nothing for all of that.
I know. Now, at the time that she's arrested and the trial occurs, her person that she went in on the monastery with, Archbishop Matthew, he had died right before it all happened. A lot of people suggest that he did know what was going on. Some people think he did not know. I kind of don't think he did.
He wasn't there anymore, though, was he? Because he had that stroke.
Yeah, he was just bedridden.
Yeah, I don't think he did.
So I think, when she was with him, she's like, oh yeah, it's all going well. And I think he was in on the financial scams, but I don't think he was in on the murder and the torture and medical neglect. I just personally don't think he knew.
It depends on how bad that stroke is. He may not have known anything that was going on.
Oh, perhaps, yeah. And I mean, she was left in charge. And even before the stroke, he was in isolation in his room for the penance. So it's like, I don't think
he did. I don't think he knew what was going on down there.
But he never ended up seeing her arrest or fall or anything. But her arrest was in 1950, and then in 1951, Greece ended up outlawing all of the old calendarists. So anyone that was of any kind of old calendarist party, it was now totally illegal. However, that did not stop them for long. But really quick, Mariam did claim to be innocent. Like, for instance, the reason the properties were in her name, she said that her and the defendant, it was all this thing of like, oh, well, it's a vow of property. Like, other monasteries do that. And the only reason that everything went to her was because there was no other legal way to do it, because it couldn't go necessarily to the monastery. And she was like, this was the best way to do it, blah, blah, blah. But nobody bought that. She also went on to say that the charges against her were, quote, satanic fiction, and denied everything.
That's horrible. That's just evil.
But she did end up gaining quite the amount of followers that supported her.
How?
Well, after she goes down, another unknown, we don't know who this other nun is, she steps in, taking Mariam's place at the monastery. She keeps the old calendarist practice secret because it's now illegal in Greece. All of a sudden, after this mysterious woman takes over, all of these young women start going missing in the area. All of the women that went missing around the monastery had interest in Mariam's monastery to begin with, or were old calendarists. And then they just end up going missing, but they could never trace them they never found these women. In 1961, the police stated that the new abbess of the monastery had, quote, perfected the art of making herself and her pseudo-sacred sisters vanish.
What do you think happened? Do you think they just joined and vanished?
I think that they continued what Mariam was doing with the torture and murder and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they went underground. Maybe not physically, but I
Yeah.
think they found a way to do it because that is what happened.
Quietly, secretly.
Yeah, which literally that would be a cult.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
But Mariam does end up dying in 1954 in prison at the age of, I think, 71. We're not totally sure. And she was buried at the same monastery. That monastery is actually still open and operating as of 2022. And the nuns there actually view her as a saint.
Shut up. Do they not know?
So I think that they still are doing it, honestly.
Oh.
And old calendarism is now legal again because of freedom of religion. And even though being an old calendarist is not a religion, the people who were following the old calendar, it was this like sect of East Orthodox. And I don't know. It's really weird that these nuns like praise her for her work.
Yeah,
and I feel like
really
if you
weird.
praised her, wouldn't you also be probably doing what she did?
I would think so.
There doesn't seem to be any more like modern information. Like the last known thing about the monastery is 2022. I don't know. It's really weird. And it's really weird that a new nun takes over and continues Mariam's legacy. And then all of a sudden all these women go missing in the area, but they can't figure anything out.
I wonder if they're still killing people and maybe just hiding it.
I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them if they consider her a saint.
Me neither.
Because they know what she did. Maybe some of them don't believe it because Mariam was like, I'm innocent. But I do think, because a lot of them, they think that she was like just kind of ahead of her time and doing the right thing.
Oh, then they are definitely still doing that.
Yeah. I know, it's scary to think about.
It is. Should we join it? Should we go undercover?
Okay. I'm down for Grease.
Oh, you can go alone. What is that? Is that what that show is about? I'm trying to think.
What show?
The one where she finally gets out at the end. Was that American Horror Story? Is that Asylum when she goes into the asylum and...
Yeah.
Okay.
She goes in undercover because they have a scary new serial killer.
Yeah, and then she can't get out. And then at the end, she, like, that one guy helps her escape.
Yeah, the one that they said was the serial killer, but he really wasn't the serial killer because the psychologist was the serial killer.
For a second, I was like, wait, was that a movie or was that show?
That's I always forget about Asylum, but I think it's the best season.
Yeah,
of Horror Story.
That's why for some reason I was like, am I thinking a movie or was that Asylum? But it was.
Coven's my favorite, but Asylum is I think the strongest.
That was a really good one. That does seem very similar to this.
Doesn't it?
It does.
And they're like also the Asylum in Horror Story, they had a bakery. It was supposedly like a really great bakery, and that was kind of their front for all the scary stuff they were doing behind the scenes. This place is kind of doing the same with being a tuberculosis treatment center, and that's how they got people in, partially.
Yeah.
So I kind of think, I feel like now with every episode we wrap up saying, I think this was the inspiration to this movie or this book.
We're starting to find a lot of different things as we go into true crime and urban legends and it's
unintentional, kind of like doing like 8 Alien episodes in a row.
We did do that.
It's just like we keep stumbling on these cases that connect to movies and books that came out much later.
Mm-hmm.
But that is all I have for you on the evil nun and her torture chamber monastery.
I can't believe that took place. And it's still probably taking place is what's even more wild about it. Maybe not as hardcore as it was then, but I can imagine they're still doing some not very well treatment of people there.
Yeah, I mean, if they're supporting her and they believe she's a saint, I'm sure they're carrying some form of her, quote, legacy into the modern day.
Maybe just not training people in cages, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much crazy stuff happening, and like a lot of it doesn't get talked about on the news.
No.
And then if you talk about it, it's like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist or you're crazy. And it's like, no, like they really did just discover like 100 bodies in a semi-truck in Arizona. Not that happened, but I mean, I have seen things about people just
Yeah.
not too long ago, literally maybe 2 years ago, there was a semi truck full of bodies, like
Yeah.
dead bodies in somewhere in England,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a trafficking thing.
I've seen a couple of those kind of stories. Oh, it's just sickening to think about.
It is, especially when it's something like a monastery because
Mm-hmm.
then it's just really not what you expect.
No.
So
Especially
think
if you
twice
go
next
to
time you
like,
see it done.
yeah, that's what I was just literally about to say. Like, it really sucks for these people who think they're going to go sign up for something of their faith and what they believe in, and then
Hmm.
they just end up basically going to like a hell.
Yeah, well, and that we see that a lot with religion and spirituality, and like wherever you and I are spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
but this is like Teal Swan. Are you familiar with her?
No.
She is like a spiritual teacher and gained this huge following. I think she's an author and YouTuber and does all sorts
Mm-hmm.
of stuff. She ended up getting tried for being a cult leader and was doing a lot of like psychological abuse. And I don't remember everything else. I might cover that actually.
Mm-hmm.
But like we see that a lot with a lot of these kind of like weird little spiritual sects that
Mm-hmm.
they run with this idea of enlightenment or this idea of faith,
Yeah.
and then they use it to really manipulate you. And not that that happens
Every time.
for everybody, but
Yeah.
that does happen because I think religion and spirituality can be a vulnerable space for
Yeah.
people,
Definitely.
which we've seen in history plenty of times as well.
Mm-hmm. I think there's some big differences, though. I think you can be religious and then you can be spiritual only, and then you can be religious and spiritual. I think the religion part sometimes is what takes over and forces people into a belief based on fear rather than just a spiritual believing by an individual, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which is
Mm-hmm.
exactly what Mariam did.
Yeah, exactly what she did. You kind of feel like they make you actually lose your spiritualism and break you
Mm-hmm.
down.
Yeah, and I think because that's exactly what the way a cult operates
Mm-hmm.
is it isolates you and it kind of breaks you down, but like artificially brings you back up, but in a way that it's like, oh, we fixed you, we saved you,
Mm-hmm.
now you owe us all of your money and all of your assets.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and you can't leave.
You're too scared to, anyways. You've seen what's gone down
Mm-hmm.
around you for people that have tried to leave or have an opinion or a voice again.
Mm-hmm. And all of that is telltale sign of a cult.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think she was a cult leader at the end of the day.
I do too. Well, that's terrifying. I won't be joining any monasteries.
You
Yeah,
won't
no, I won't be.
be? Me either.
Well, very well done.
Thank you.
Lots of interesting history there that I had no idea about.
Mm-hmm. I almost felt like it was more like a dark history.
Yeah.
Like a dark history kind of true crime.
Mm-hmm. Which
Because
is,
it wasn't like a case.
yeah, which is something we haven't done. So,
Yeah. And I've been meaning to cover some kind of cult.
mm-hmm.
And I want to cover like an official cult soon. I just haven't found the right one because some of them get a little bit like,
Yeah, a little.
I don't know. I want the right one to talk about.
Yeah.
And I haven't found it.
And a lot of them are so well known. It's kind of like, what's the point of repeating what everybody else has said 100 billion times?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There is one that that is like super well known that I am very interested in covering, and that would be the Manson girls.
Yeah. I feel like people know more about Charles Manson and the murders and not so much
Yes.
about the backstory and how
Well,
it
they think
began.
he was a murderer.
Yeah,
and
he didn't.
Technically, he
No,
wasn't.
he never murdered anybody. He just
No. I
manipulated
think he
people into
might be
doing it.
charged with like something that connects him to the
Mhm.
homicide, obviously, because he was the one who led it.
And he didn't do very well in court. Like he was crazy.
Hmm. Well, that's all I have on Mariam Soulakiotis.
I guess with that, we'll say
Good night.
and pleasant nightmares.
Bye.
Bye.